When Marcus, an undercover millionaire disguised as another random customer trying to eat at his own food chain, walked into the GrillRoot in Tall Pines, Oregon, he never imagined he'd stumble into the most shocking secret of his life. He ordered his meal, quietly surveyed the room, and was ready to eat when the waitress dropped the bombshell. She said it under her breath, just as she placed the dessert in front of what she thought was another weary traveler passing through. "If you're new here, be careful. This place is a big trap," she said quietly. He froze in deep shock. The moment those 7 words left her lips, his heart sank. Something was broken, and it was happening right under his nose. Before we go further, do ensure to subscribe and also comment where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. Marcus had been here before. Not in Tall Pines, but in 100 small towns across the country, watching each branch of GrillRoot rise like a symbol of pride and purpose. He had built the brand on a simple idea: good food, honest work, and better treatment than the industry usually offered. He swore he'd never let it become like the corporations he once worked for: cold, exploitative, and soulless. But something was off here. The dining room was picture-perfect on the surface. Warm lighting, polished wood, the sound of plates clinking and laughter echoing. But there was a stiffness in the air, like everyone was holding their breath. The servers moved quickly, but not freely. Their smiles were mechanical. Laughter came in short bursts, not from the staff, but from the customers. And then there was her, Zariah, the waitress who had unknowingly shattered the illusion. She was calm and collected, but her eyes carried exhaustion that no amount of makeup could hide. She hadn't said those words with bitterness. There was no sarcasm, no edge, only warning, like someone who had once believed in something and watched it fade. Marcus watched her from the corner of his eye as she moved to the next table. Her posture was sharp, her movements graceful, but her lips didn't smile unless she had to. He'd seen that look before. Years ago, in his mother, after a 10-hour diner shift in Houston when tips were low and bills were high. The look of someone doing everything right and still losing. He took a bite of his apple pie. It tasted fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. But he barely noticed. Zariah's words echoed in his mind, looping like a broken track. "This place will break you." He wanted to believe it was just a passing comment, a moment of frustration, but instinct told him otherwise. Marcus had come to Tall Pines unannounced. No entourage, no warning to management. Just a baseball cap, a flannel shirt, and the name Mark on the trainee paperwork. He wasn't there for food or fanfare. He was there because of numbers. The Tall Pines branch had shown unusual losses. High staff turnover, rising customer complaints online. Something was leaking through the walls of a business he once thought was airtight. And now, a waitress just confirmed it. After paying for his meal, cash, no trace, he left a generous tip, just enough to feel polite, not suspicious. Zariah didn't glance at it. She just nodded once, eyes already scanning the next table. Outside, the cold Oregon air hit him like a splash of reality. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching his own restaurant hum behind glass. It was surreal, like watching someone else wear your clothes. He pulled out his phone and opened the internal portal he'd built for emergencies, something only he could access. He tapped through the Tall Pines employee roster, found Zariah's name, and clicked on her file. 5 years on staff. No disciplinary notes. Consistently high customer satisfaction reviews. Yet her base pay hadn't changed in 2 years. He checked the turnover rates. 12 staff members had quit in the last 4 months. 12. He zoomed in on the payroll entries. Some hours had been modified. Bonuses scheduled then canceled. Benefit plans marked as pending for over a year. Marcus stared at the screen, heart pounding. What had happened to his business? He didn't go home that night. Instead, he checked into a small roadside motel less than a mile from the restaurant. The room was plain, yellowed lamps, heavy drapes, the smell of old carpet, but it was quiet. That was all he needed. He opened his laptop. For hours, he combed through digital footprints, time logs, contractor invoices, benefit claims, turnover data from 5 nearby branches. Patterns began to emerge. The same third-party payroll vendor was linked to every flagged location. The same district manager's name appeared on every approval. And every restaurant had a Zariah. Someone loyal. Someone too tired to keep speaking up. Someone who stayed not because of the job, but because they had nowhere else to go. Marcus shut his laptop around 2 a.m., sat back in the stiff motel chair, and stared at the ceiling. Anger rose in him. Not the flashy kind, not the kind that shouts, but the cold, focused kind. The kind that builds things from rubble. He thought about his mother again. How she used to come home after midnight, fingers swollen from carrying plates. How she died before ever seeing what he built. And now, the legacy he'd sworn to protect was being hollowed out from the inside. But not anymore. He reached for his phone and typed a single note to himself. Start with Zariah. Watch everything. He wasn't just passing through anymore. He was staying. And this time, he was watching everyone. By the second morning, Marcus Bellamy had learned how to clock in like the rest of them. Swipe, beep, fake smile. The name on his badge said Mark W., a made-up name for a man pretending not to own the very building he walked into. The uniform fit poorly, the apron smelled like stale oil, and the training manual was already fraying at the edges. But none of it bothered him. He wasn't there for comfort. He was there for the cracks. Zariah didn't speak much as she trained him. Her instruction came in gestures and glances. A nod to refill a glass, a tilt of the head toward a misfired order, a brief pause when management passed too close. She moved with precision, grace, but there was tension in her shoulders. The kind that came not from physical strain, but from knowing that if she slipped, just once, it might cost her everything. Marcus learned quickly that appearances meant survival. Smiles weren't for joy, they were shields. The staff laughed, sure, but only when customers were near. Behind the kitchen doors, the air was heavier. A kind of quiet fatigue settled over everything, like a blanket soaked with years of unmet promises. On day 3, Marcus noticed the cook, an older man named Rudy, staring down at the fryer with a clenched jaw. Everything good? Marcus asked casually. Rudy didn't look up. You ever work 12 hours and get paid for 8? Marcus said nothing. Rudy snorted. Didn't think so. At first, Marcus wanted to believe it was an isolated case. A scheduling error. A bad manager. But it wasn't. By the end of the week, he'd heard 4 similar complaints. Different staff. Same story. The hours weren't adding up. During a late shift, as the restaurant emptied and the music dulled to a background hum, Marcus saw her again. A young server, barely 22, stood at the back of the dining room, wiping a table that had already been cleaned twice. Her name was Molly. She had soft features and eyes that always looked just slightly too red, like someone who cried in private. Marcus walked past slowly and caught the faint sound of her sniffling. He didn't interrupt. He just kept walking, but he took mental note. Molly had clocked in early, worked double shifts, and stayed past closing for the last 3 nights. He remembered because he'd checked the schedules. She was one of the highest performing servers, but her pay band didn't reflect it. And she never complained. Until that night. That night, she didn't say anything at all, but her silence said enough. The next day, Marcus approached the assistant manager, a stiff-backed man named Keith who always smelled like burnt espresso and cologne. Hey, Marcus said casually, towel slung over his shoulder. I had a quick question about the benefit plans. You know, like health stuff. Are those actually active? Keith didn't even look up from his clipboard. Not your concern. Marcus hesitated. Just asking because, don't. Keith cut in sharply. You're new. Just do your job. And that was the end of it. The tone wasn't just dismissive, it was threatening. A warning wrapped in corporate tone. Marcus nodded like any rookie would, then walked away. But inside, the fire had started to build. That night, he sat in his motel room, writing with a pen on the back of his receipt envelope. 1 line at a time. Name. Incident. Date. Hours versus pay. Words said. Tears seen. Each entry chipped away at the version of GrillRoot he thought still existed. He flipped through staff schedules, compared them to publicly posted labor laws, cross-referenced every digital punch with handwritten notes. Patterns emerged like bruises under skin. Shift reductions without warning. Mandatory unpaid overtime. Shaved tips. None of it was a mistake. It was a system. And Zariah? She knew. As they closed up that Friday night, Marcus found her folding aprons by the back exit. She didn't look up when she spoke. You asked Keith about benefits, she said quietly. He paused. Yeah. She finally looked up. Her eyes were tired, but steady. They take your hours, your voice, she said, and make you thank them for it. Marcus felt the weight of it land squarely in his chest. There was no bitterness in her tone, only truth. It was worse than he'd imagined. They ever threaten you? He asked carefully. Zariah chuckled under her breath. Not with words. Marcus didn't press. He just nodded and walked away, but he knew then he wasn't leaving Tall Pines anytime soon. What had started as a curious visit, a secret audit to confirm some numbers, had turned into something deeply personal. He had built this place with his own hands, brick by metaphorical brick. He'd sold his car to fund his first restaurant, slept in the back office, hired people who needed second chances. Now, someone had poisoned the roots. He folded the receipt envelope and slid it into his coat pocket. Tomorrow, he would start watching even more closely. He would ask fewer questions. Let them think he was fading into the background. Because sometimes, when you want to catch a monster, you have to stay quiet long enough to hear it breathe. And Marcus Bellamy was listening now, very closely. The room smelled of old coffee and motel carpet. Nothing glamorous, but it offered privacy, and right now, that mattered more than luxury. Marcus Bellamy sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the glow of his laptop screen like it held the answers to a riddle he hadn't even known existed a week ago. Outside, the Oregon wind rattled the thin motel window. Inside, his fingers moved fast, faster than they had in years, as he pulled up internal GrillRoot systems. He had built these tools himself in the early days, back when the company was still running on fumes and passion. A centralized data portal, invisible to most regional teams. Only he could see this deep, and what he saw turned his stomach. The first red flag had started in Tall Pines: shaved hours, missing benefits, shift overlaps that didn't align with recorded payroll. But now, cross-referencing 6 other GrillRoot branches across the state, he began to see a pattern. Not an error, a design. Hours mysteriously rounded down. Performance bonuses marked, pending, and never paid. Contractors billing the company twice for talent acquisition and system integration, buzzwords that meant nothing when he looked deeper. It was the same vendor name appearing again and again. Omnitech Payroll Solutions. He leaned back, hand dragging across his mouth. Phil Trent. The name echoed like a sour note in the quiet room. Phil had been promoted 2 years ago, regional manager for the entire Pacific Northwest. Ambitious, confident, charming in that slippery way people always mistook for leadership. Marcus remembered interviewing him once in a hotel lobby in Seattle. Phil had smiled too much, said all the right things too quickly. But Marcus had ignored his gut. He needed someone strong to oversee the expansion. Now that same man was standing at the center of something foul. Every discrepancy, every manipulated paycheck, every falsified bonus denial led back to regions under Phil Trent's control. And every one of those regions used Omnitech as their payroll vendor. But that wasn't the worst part. Omnitech didn't exist in the way it should have. The company had no physical office listed, no verifiable leadership, just a web of dummy contacts and a P.O. box in Spokane. A shell, a front. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He hadn't just missed a red flag. He'd been asleep at the wheel. His people, his employees, had been suffering while he sat in boardrooms, shaking hands with sponsors and talking expansion. And behind it all, Trent had been cashing in. A knock at the door snapped him out of the spiral. He rose cautiously, double-checked the peephole. It was Zariah. She stood beneath the flickering hallway light in her work uniform, jacket zipped to her neck, eyes alert. Marcus opened the door and let her in silently. "I figured you weren't sleeping either," she said, pulling a small envelope from her coat pocket. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward it. She set it on the table like it was evidence in a trial. "My pay stubs. And these," she added, pulling her phone from her back pocket and unlocking it, "are messages from the others. They're scared, but they've been documenting things." He sat beside her as she scrolled. Messages filled the screen. "They took 10 hours off again this week. I asked Keith, and he said the system corrected it. Molly worked 14 hours Saturday. Got paid for 9. We're not allowed to talk about the missing bonuses. HR keeps ghosting." Zariah didn't speak while he read. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. "I've been saving them," she finally said. "Wasn't sure who I was saving them for." Marcus looked up, jaw set. "You saved them for me." And he meant it. Zariah had been fighting in silence for months, maybe years. Carrying stories no one wanted to hear. Most people would have quit. But she hadn't. She stayed. Not out of loyalty to a paycheck, but out of a stubborn hope that someone might care. Marcus did. He opened her pay stubs and scanned the figures. They didn't match anything on file in the corporate system. Entire shifts were missing. Some were signed off by regional override. He cross-checked the digital signatures. They matched Phil Trent's ID. Every lie, every manipulation was signed. Digitally, officially, and deliberately. Marcus stood and began to pace. "I built this company to honor my father," he said suddenly, voice low. "He died scrubbing dishes in a restaurant that didn't even give him health insurance. Worked himself sick until the day he collapsed on the kitchen floor. They had the nerve to call it natural causes." Zariah looked up, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "I promised myself I'd never be that kind of employer," he continued. "I put systems in place. Guardrails. And Trent." He stopped himself, inhaling through his nose. Trent found the cracks. And pushed. Zariah stood, too. "So what now?" He turned to her. For a moment, he saw not just the waitress who trained him silently for a week, but a leader. Someone who never asked to be in this fight, but chose to stay in it anyway. "Now," he said, "we collect everything. We build a case strong enough to tear down the whole rotten frame." She didn't blink. "I'll help." "No," he said. "You've already done enough. I won't let Trent touch you." She shook her head. "You don't get it, Marcus. He already has." They stood in silence, the motel lamp buzzing faintly beside them. Marcus walked to the small table, grabbed a pen, and opened a fresh page in his notebook. This time, he wrote the name at the top in bold ink. Phil Trent. Beneath it, payroll fraud. Shell company. Digital signature trace. Whistleblower texts. Staff wage discrepancies. Zariah's records. He closed the book and slid it into his bag. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, the man behind the curtain had finally been seen, and Marcus Bellamy wasn't looking away again. There's a certain kind of silence that settles before something breaks. Zariah felt it first. It started with sideways glances, too long, too quiet. Managers who once ignored her now tracked her with their eyes when she moved across the floor. Conversations paused when she walked by. Even Keith, the ever-arrogant assistant manager, had suddenly stopped barking orders and replaced them with tight-lipped stares. Something had shifted. And Phil Trent, he felt it too. The regional manager's sudden visits to Tall Pines became more frequent. He never said much. Just stood near the host stand, arms crossed, sunglasses never leaving his face, watching the floor like a hawk searching for the source of a leak. His smile was hollow. His presence, invasive. It didn't take long for him to notice the new guy. Marcus, still in his trainee disguise, was asking too many questions. Too many conversations with floor staff. Too many casual moments that weren't casual at all. Most troubling of all, he always seemed to be near Zariah. Phil didn't know Marcus's face. Not yet. But something about him stirred suspicion. And when the weekly supervisor report landed in Phil's inbox, Zariah's name appeared 3 times. Once, for being overly inquisitive. Once, for prolonged conversations with a new male hire. And finally, for a vague, possible violation of chain-of-command communication. It was the last one that made him look up from his desk. That night, Zariah stayed late, wiping down booths after a particularly draining double shift. The dining room was empty except for her and one young line cook. She hummed to herself quietly, thinking no one was listening. She didn't notice the man in khaki standing just outside the back exit door. The next morning, her locker was ajar. Nothing was missing, at first glance. Her uniform was folded the same way. Her spare shoes still tucked neatly into the corner. But something felt off. Her water bottle had been opened. Her notepad, a spiral-bound one she used for table numbers, was turned to the wrong page. And her phone? It wouldn't turn on. Zariah stood in the staff room, staring at the blank screen. A chill crept up her spine. She said nothing that day. Just did her job with tighter shoulders, fewer smiles, and a constant weight in her chest. But when her shift ended and she walked out into the employee parking lot, she froze. Across the lot, leaning casually against a light post, was a man she'd never seen before. Ball cap, hooded jacket, pretending to scroll his phone. But he wasn't scrolling. He was watching her. Their eyes met for half a second, and then he turned and walked away. Zariah didn't go home that night. She went straight to Marcus's motel. He opened the door and didn't need to ask anything. Her face said it all. She stepped inside, hands trembling slightly. "They're watching me." Marcus shut the door gently behind her. "Tell me everything." She recounted the broken locker, the wiped phone, the man by the light post, each word more cautious than the last, as if speaking them out loud made it more real. "I don't know if it was Trent directly," she said, "but he knows something's happening." I can feel it. Marcus didn't speak right away. He stood by the window, staring out into the parking lot like the answers were hidden between the raindrops. Then, without turning around, he said, "Do you know why I built GrillRoot?" Zariah looked confused but shook her head. "My dad," Marcus said. "He scrubbed dishes until his hands bled. Died before he ever saw me make something out of it. I swore I'd build a place where people like him were safe." He finally turned. His eyes were darker now, colder. And now someone's trying to hurt the one person brave enough to tell the truth. He picked up his phone and made one call. Within 20 minutes, 2 plainclothes security professionals, former private detail agents, were booked and en route from Portland. Their instructions were clear: 24-hour watch. No contact with Zariah. No interference unless absolutely necessary. They were shadows. Protection Zariah would never see, but always have. Marcus paced after the call. His jaw clenched. The investigation was no longer just about payroll manipulation or forged reports. This was something else now. Something personal. They weren't just covering up theft. They were silencing people. He turned back to Zariah, who sat silently at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "You're not alone," he said gently. "Not anymore." Her lip quivered, just once. But she nodded. The next morning, Zariah walked into the restaurant like any other day. She tied her apron, poured coffee, greeted customers. But this time, she felt something different. Not fear. Coverage. Unseen, just across the street, one of the guards leaned casually against a newsstand, sipping coffee. Another sat in a parked sedan 3 cars down, reading a newspaper that concealed a tablet streaming the parking lot security feed. Zariah didn't know it, but every step she took that day was shadowed by eyes trained to stop danger before it reached her. Phil Trent didn't know it either, but he was being watched too. The call came just after 10:12 p.m. Zariah had just finished her shift. The dining room was dark, chairs flipped onto tables, the soft hum of the dishwashers in the back fading as the kitchen lights blinked out one by one. She was tired, body sore, mind foggy from a long day pretending not to be afraid. She didn't even check the caller ID. She just saw the name Maya flash across the screen, her younger brother's friend, and picked up immediately. "Zariah?" The voice was rushed, trembling. "It's Maya. It's your brother, Jalen. He's hurt. They said he's outside the restaurant, near the far end of the lot." I didn't know who else to call. Zariah's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't question it, didn't pause, didn't wonder how Maya even got her number. She just dropped her apron on the counter, yanked her coat from the hook, and bolted into the night. The parking lot was mostly empty. Just a few scattered cars and a flickering overhead light. Her breath clouded in the cold as she hurried past the employee entrance, heart pounding harder with each step. "Jalen," she called out, voice cracking. No answer. Then she saw movement. 2 men stepped out from behind a parked SUV. Her body froze. One of them was tall, wiry, face hidden under a hoodie. The other was heavier, with a buzz cut and a gloved hand tightening around something metal tucked at his waist. They didn't say anything. They just walked toward her, too quickly, too purposefully. Zariah turned to run, but they were already close. One reached for her wrist. She screamed, but they never touched her. In an instant, chaos erupted. From the shadows near the dumpster, a blur of movement struck the tall man from behind. One of Marcus's plainclothes guards, silent and swift. The second man barely had time to react before a second figure tackled him from the side, driving him to the pavement with a bone-rattling crack. Zariah stumbled back, breath ragged, as the 2 attackers were pinned to the cold asphalt. One struggled, cursing. The other wheezed, clearly winded. Within moments, red and blue lights cut through the parking lot. Sirens. Tires screeching. The local police, already tipped off by Marcus's team, flooded the scene with speed and precision. Zariah stood near the edge of the lot, trembling, as an officer draped a blanket over her shoulders. She didn't cry. Not yet. Her mind was still catching up to the moment. At the precinct, she sat in a warm, quiet room sipping water from a paper cup. Her phone, finally restored, sat untouched beside her. Her hands were still shaking. The officer who took her statement was kind, soft-voiced and patient, but Zariah barely heard the words. She was still stuck on one. Why? Then the door opened. And in stepped Marcus Bellamy. Only, he wasn't Mark the trainee anymore. No apron, no flannel shirt, no cap pulled low over his eyes. He wore a dark suit, neatly pressed, and a quiet expression that carried more weight than any words could. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look panicked. He looked like a man who had expected this and prepared for it. Zoraya stared at him in stunned silence. "You?" she breathed. Marcus nodded. There were no theatrics, no grand confession. Just that small, solemn nod between them. She felt the truth land slowly in her chest like bricks being set, one by one. He had known. He had known everything, and yet he'd scrubbed floors beside her, bussed tables, followed orders from managers who couldn't see past his disguise. And now he was here, not as a trainee, but as the man who built the chain, the man who was finally ready to step forward. "Why didn't you tell me?" Zoraya asked, voice hoarse. Marcus looked down for a moment, then met her gaze. "Because I needed to see it for myself, and I needed them to think I was no one." Before she could say more, the door opened again. A detective leaned in, holding a notepad. "One of them confessed," he said. "Said they were paid to scare her, rattle her enough to quit. Didn't say who sent them, just that it came with a warning. She's looking too hard." Zoraya's throat tightened. It wasn't just intimidation. It was a message. "Do we know how they got her number?" Marcus asked, his voice sharper now. "We're tracing the spoof call," the detective said. "Whoever set this up made it look like it came from a teenager's number. Might have cloned a contact. This was planned." Marcus nodded, jaw clenched. "I want full surveillance pulled from the restaurant lot. If Trent was behind this, I want to know every step." The detective left the room, and silence returned. Zoraya finally turned to him. "What now?" Marcus's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Now," he said, "we go public." She blinked. "Just like that." "There's no hiding after this," he replied. "They tried to hurt you, Zoraya. That makes this bigger than wages or stolen hours. It's criminal now, and I won't let them bury it." Zoraya looked down at the cup in her hands. She hadn't asked for any of this. She never wanted to be a symbol or a fighter. She just wanted to be treated fairly. To work hard and sleep at night without fear. But here she was. And Marcus? He wasn't just the man behind the curtain anymore. He was standing beside her, with all the weight of his name and power ready to bear down on the system that had failed them both. When they finally stepped out into the hallway, the first rays of dawn were creeping across the sky. Zoraya pulled her coat tighter. The air still bit at her cheeks. But this time, she didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't have to. The conference room was silent. Not the ordinary kind of silence that precedes a budget report or a marketing pitch. This silence was different. Stiff. Uneasy. The kind that made men in suits loosen their ties, not because they were hot, but because they knew they were about to get burned. Marcus Bellamy stood at the head of the long walnut table, not in disguise, not in uniform, just himself. The founder. The man whose face once graced magazine covers for revolutionizing the restaurant industry. His eyes moved slowly across the room, making sure none of the 15 executives, attorneys, or compliance officers dared look away. Beside him sat Zoraya. She wore her dignity like armor. No makeup, no pretense. Just the same woman who had once whispered a warning across a table and set this entire reckoning into motion. The screen behind them lit up. A slideshow, timed, simple, devastating. First slide, a forged contractor invoice from Omnitech Payroll Solutions, signed off by Phil Trent for employee optimization services, a phrase that meant nothing, backed by thousands in missing wages. Next slide, time logs with digitally altered shift records. Then, a heat map showing 7 GrillRoot locations with identical payroll discrepancies, all under Trent's control. Finally, Zoraya's phone messages. Dozens of screenshots. Names redacted, but voices raw and damning. They cut hours again. HR doesn't return emails. They warn me not to talk. We're tired, but scared. Then came the surveillance footage, the attempted attack in the parking lot. 2 men, clear as day, reaching for Zoraya before being taken down by Marcus's private security. One had already confessed. Paid to scare her. Paid to silence her. The room stayed still. Marcus stepped forward and spoke. "I started GrillRoot because I believed we could be better than this industry. Better than the places my father worked himself to death in. I gave people second chances. I promised dignity." He glanced down, voice tightening. "And while I was shaking hands and cutting ribbons, someone was building an empire of exploitation in my name." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Then he turned, facing the man sitting halfway down the table, the one who had stopped tapping his pen 3 slides ago. Phil Trent. Phil looked paler than usual. His smile was gone. The bravado that once filled every room he walked into had evaporated beneath the weight of truth. The paperwork, the signatures, the testimony. It was all right there. Marcus said nothing to him. He just slid a single sheet across the table. A termination letter. Effective immediately. You're done, Marcus said quietly. Phil didn't speak. He knew better. One of the attorneys at the table had already picked up a phone. As security escorted him from the room, no one moved. Only Zariah watched him go, eyes unblinking. After the door shut, Marcus turned back to the table. Omnitech has been reported to the Department of Labor and federal authorities. Every falsified payroll, every fraudulent invoice, is being turned over as of this morning. One of the executives opened his mouth, but Marcus raised a hand. We're not burying this. We're not spinning it. We're owning it. With that, he reached for the laptop and pressed a button. The screen behind him changed again. This time to a live video feed. The company-wide message had begun. Across every GrillRoot location, from Miami to Seattle, employees stopped what they were doing. The video played in break rooms, kitchens, service stations, even projected on the walls of some stores. People leaned in. Some stood with arms folded, skeptical. Others watched with silent hope. Marcus's voice came through clearly. My name is Marcus Bellamy. I'm not here today as your boss. I'm here as the man who let something terrible grow inside the company I built. And I'm sorry. Zariah watched the screen as if hearing it for the first time. We failed you, Marcus continued. Not just with hours or wages, but with safety, with respect, with trust. I promise you now, the people responsible are gone. The system that allowed it is being dismantled. And we're rebuilding, with your voices at the center. He paused on the video. And I want to introduce someone who made that possible. The feed shifted to a still image of Zariah, taken that morning, simple and strong. No grand applause, just a name beneath it. Zariah James, Tall Pines server, whistleblower, leader. The video ended. In the Tall Pines location, as the final frame faded, someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds, the entire break room erupted. Cooks, hosts, servers, standing and applauding. When Zariah walked in later that day, the applause began again. This time louder, sharper, a roar that shook the room. No speeches, no tears, just recognition. She stood in the doorway, stunned, as her co-workers stood and clapped like they were clapping for all the times they hadn't. But back in the boardroom, it wasn't over. As the last few executives stood to leave, Marcus turned to Zariah. I know this wasn't what you asked for, he said. She gave a small smile. It never is. He nodded. But I want more than a bonus or a thank you. I want you to lead something. She tilted her head. I'm starting an initiative, internal, but independent. A watchdog. A voice inside the company that reports directly to me. Policy reviews. Ethics panels. Employee rights training. I want GrillRoot to become the gold standard for worker treatment in this industry. And I want you to build it. Zariah blinked. You want me to lead it? I trust you more than anyone I've ever hired. She didn't answer right away. Then she looked him in the eye. Then let's do it right. Marcus smiled. The reckoning wasn't just about taking down the corrupt. It was about building something no one could bury again. 6 months later, the world looked different. Not because the restaurant industry had changed overnight, but because one woman's voice had reached the edge of silence and refused to stop. The stage stood beneath a blue spring sky in downtown Atlanta, framed by banners that read, The Beacon Table Initiative. A name that once lived only in Marcus Bellamy's notebook, now etched in bold across the hearts of thousands. Cameras clicked. Reporters packed tightly behind velvet ropes, their lenses fixed not on a politician or celebrity, but on a woman who had once been just another name on a shift schedule. Zariah James stood behind the podium, radiant, composed, dressed in soft green, with her natural curls pinned back and her eyes glowing, not with nerves, but with clarity. Behind her stood the newly appointed board, former line cooks, servers, dishwashers, shift leads, each one carrying the weight of stories that had never been heard until now. And to her right, just behind the curtain of the stage, stood Marcus. No tie, no speech in hand. Just him, silent, proud, and still listening to the woman who'd turned his entire empire on its head, then gave it purpose again. Zariah adjusted the mic and spoke. I used to believe my job was to serve food and keep quiet, she began, her voice strong and unwavering. To smile for tips, ignore the missing hours, and pray the paycheck didn't bounce. The crowd was quiet. No one moved. I remember wiping tables with numb fingers, she continued, and thinking, this is the price of survival. You don't complain. You don't question. You just endure. She paused. The breeze lifted the edge of her dress, but she stood firmly. Then one day, I whispered a warning to a stranger over a plate of apple pie. 7 words I didn't think would matter. She glanced toward Marcus. He gave a small nod, almost invisible, but enough. And everything changed. Flashes burst again, but she didn't flinch. I'm not here because I was the loudest, she said. I'm here because I was tired. Tired of surviving. Tired of watching good people give everything and get nothing in return. She stepped back from the mic just for a breath, then leaned in again. The Beacon Table Initiative isn't about revenge. It's not about taking down every bad boss or rewriting every rule overnight. Her voice softened, but her words hit harder. It's about dignity. About reminding the industry that every person behind the counter has a name, a life, a right to be safe, to be paid, to be heard. Applause erupted, not thunderous, not wild, but sustained. Respectful. Deep. She smiled. Not the tight, weary kind she used to wear while balancing trays, but a real one. One born from something earned. In the last 6 months, she continued as the crowd quieted, we've helped 112 workers recover lost wages. We've exposed 3 companies for fraudulent payroll practices. We've created training programs, legal aid partnerships, and a national hotline. The screen behind her flickered with photos. Workers in kitchens holding signs that read I matter too. Teams gathered around laptops learning about their rights. Letters from former employees who'd finally spoken up. We're just getting started, Zariah said. Then, with a small tremor in her voice, one she didn't fight, she added, my name is Zariah James. I was a waitress. Now I'm a protector of tables. And I promise you this, no one will eat in silence anymore. The crowd rose. This time the applause did thunder. Marcus looked down for a moment, hands in his pockets, his throat tight. He remembered sitting across from her in that little motel room, hearing her speak for the first time, really speak, and knowing, even then, she had more power in her truth than any speech he'd ever written. Now, the whole country knew it too. The video went live within minutes. The speech, captured on 3 phones and a professional live stream, spread like a spark over dry grass. By nightfall, it had over 2 million views. Restaurant workers in Texas, New York, and Ohio uploaded clips of themselves echoing her line. I spoke up because I was tired of surviving. Union leaders quoted her. Labor rights groups shared her photo. Some called her the waitress who changed the industry. She didn't like that title, because she hadn't changed it yet, but she had forced it to look in the mirror. Back in Tall Pines, the staff at her old GrillRoot branch gathered in the break room to watch the speech replay. Someone brought in donuts. Someone else printed out her photo and taped it to the wall above the time clock. Molly, the quiet server who once cried during closing shift, stood in the back, hands clasped tightly. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She just whispered, she did it. The ripple had begun. A quiet warning spoken over dessert had become a national movement. A revolution dressed not in riots or lawsuits, but in truth, grit, and dignity. As the event ended and reporters called her name, Zariah stepped off the stage and walked toward Marcus. You still okay with letting me run this thing? She asked. He smiled. You've already built more in 6 months than I did in 6 years. Good, she said, adjusting her blazer. Because I'm just getting warmed up. And with that, she turned back toward the crowd, not as a former waitress, but as the voice of millions. The table had turned, and this time, everyone would have a seat. If you enjoyed the story of Marcus Bellamy and Zariah James, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives. Let us know what you think about how everything ended, from Phil Trent's downfall to the launch of the Beacon Table Initiative. What part moved you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you.